Welcome to Sunspots, where we explore the many ways that the Holy Spirit is working in the people, places, ministries, and missions on the surface of the sun. That is, the Synod of the Sun. A region of the Presbyterian Church USA, we are Presbyterians in Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, with dynamic and hopeful ministry happening in the name of Jesus Christ. Our prayer is that you find inspiration, community, and connection in the Sun. Now, let's get started. Today, I'm talking with the Reverend Scott Campbell. Scott answered the call to ministry after a successful career in human resources. He served as the pastor of Grace Presbyterian Church in Lubbock, Texas, for 10 years, just down the hall from the Presbytery office, where he now serves as the Executive Presbyter for Palo Duro Presbytery. All of this while working on his doctorate in ministry at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. Scott opens up with me about his new role and ways that the congregation stepped up during the pandemic. I had so much fun getting to know him better. I'm sure you will too. So why don't we start with your story?
Okay.
You were just telling me a story of your youth about the way that you grew up, but tell us your story.
Well, I was reared in Big Spring, Texas on an Air Force base. And my dad was from the Air Force, but I lived in the same home all the years I was reared there. And I'm very proud to be from there. I got an outstanding education between the base and the multicultural influence of everyone coming there to the base. You had these magnificent men being trained to be pilots in Vietnam. And I think the story I was telling you earlier is every night before I would go to bed, I'd have to polish my black leather shoes with excellence, and every morning my dad had to be able to bounce a quarter or $50 off my bed. And it wasn't a thing of treachery. It was a thing of joy. And out of that, I think I tried to instill a sense of excellence in even the smallest details. But with the Vietnam War, I have all these memories where my best friends would be tapped on their shoulder in the middle of class, and they will have heard that their father was killed in Vietnam, and I would never see that friend again. And so we had this roving set of families in our community who all of a sudden would have devastating news or would be called to another base and left. I think that's part of my sense of pastoral care that began even then.
Yeah.
And because it's the Permian Basin and oil and the rise and fall of the oil price, but we had excellent education, and I'm a graduate of the University of Texas. I spent 25 years or so in high tech and second career minister through Austin Seminary. Worked like everyone who would like to. I took several roles as a chaplain in Austin through both the St. David's Network and the Seton Network, and had been misdiagnosed with MS. I just had a prayer with my wife, and we decided, could we do something then what was comfortable? We lived in downtown Austin. We loved it. Been there almost 30 years, maybe 31. And I put my PIF out, and within an hour I had a call, and with 1 month I was in Lubbock, Texas.
Wow.
And I was with Grace Presbyterian for shy 10 years. And I've been in this role shy 3. Can you believe it?
Wow. It doesn't seem like that long.
And I'm sad to say that sums up my life in 2 minutes.
What made you want to be the Presbyterian leader? What made you want to take that leap?
Let me have a big swig of coffee. Are we being really honest on this call?
Well, sure. I hope so.
Well, it's one thing to be honest. It's another thing to put your vulnerability on the line for others to hear. But I think that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Well, the quick answer is I was called and I really thought about it, and I fell into a prayerful dialogue. Could I? Because my previous experience with presbytery work was very disheartening during the schism. Mm-hmm. And I was ashamed of what some of the things in dialogue and fights. And I was very shy to share what I had heard at presbytery with the church I served alongside. But this startling thing about our faith tradition that I hold so high is that the representatives, they're elected from the pews, serve the church for Christ alongside one another. And I really fell into the higher calling, the highest calling that the presbytery and the synod and the GA can be. And so also I had a rigorous Easter one year as minister. And I think that's when all ministers reassess their call. They have a long Easter nap. And this is a note for all PNCs. And ministers have to reassess their call, their ministry, their future, and the churches. And several people had surrounded me, and I thought about it, and it was hard. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done is to leave that church relationship, which it was like I still have scar tissue from it. I love them so much. One moment I want to give them my kidney, and the next I have to separate myself from them and stay away so the new minister can be successful. That has been a very hard thing. Yeah. But here we are. And a lot of my background at my first career was conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. And I had served as a corporate terminator and pastor, for lack of a better phrase. And that's one thing that had led me to seminary. I use those skills as an executive presbyter.
On a daily basis, I'm imagining.
Yeah. And it's about praising. It's about assessing. It's about how can we support this church more? How can we get out of the way for them to be successful? Mm-hmm. How can we love them? So much of what we do, I don't think we talk about enough. And so they may just, churches often may see us for draconian things, but we do 99% of what we do are very loving things to make sure the session and the minister are very successful.
So when you say we, you're referring to the presbytery.
I'm referring to the presbytery, but I'm also referring to the synod. I'm always kind of humbled by the quiet things the synod does. I think they're quiet. Now, at presbytery meetings, you remind us, but generally the churches and the pews, they don't know all that the synod is doing. They certainly don't always know what the presbytery is doing. Our presbyters, if I could be so balanced in feedback, mm-hmm. They are not good at relaying information to the pews about all the good work, the missional, the connectional, the lifting up, the love, mm-hmm. the grants, the hard work that we do. And sometimes the stated clerk, the clerk of session, these people know. I think it's one of my jobs is to make sure more people know what we're doing.
Sure. And it is definitely the same case at the synod level. I don't know how you feel about it, but I am sure that at the synod level, and I'm sure I am so sure because of the way that people have shared with me that commissioners at the synod level often don't understand what they're hearing mm-hmm. until several years in, right? Yeah. I've had commissioners come to me after they've served a full term of 3 years and say, Now I get it. Right. The first year you were asking me to take what I'm hearing and take it back to my presbytery and tell them all about the work of the synod, but I didn't understand it. And oftentimes they're afraid someone's going to ask them questions and they don't really understand it. And so it's difficult for them to take it back, which is why I'm rather emphatic about the time that I can get on a presbytery docket to share about the work of the synod in that way. And often because there are 11 presbyteries and you have so many meetings, I often feel like I'm repeating myself, but that's
what we do.
That is what we do. Right.
Well, we're going back and forth. Let me turn this around. Why in the world would you ever be a synod leader? I'm going to undo my tie for this one.
Yeah. This is not, when I first came to work for the Synod of the Sun as administrative assistant to the synod leader 17 years ago, I was a couple of years in when I realized, this is probably the worst career move I've ever made in my life. It was not where I sit now was never my plan. I never had a plan. I really believe that God had a plan. and obviously I didn't see it for a long time. And so, but in doing all of that, all of the work from administrative assistant to, director of administrative services and, all of the different positions that I've held, I'm learning, constantly learning and being taught. My faith journey has developed. The synod, just working at the synod and the people that I've been surrounded with, my faith journey has, I've learned so much, and I've gone, kind of like a pendulum swinging. And so I don't think I've really answered the question, except to say that it's not something that I planned. Yes, I applied for the position. I applied for the position, but I felt like this is where God put me.
Now we've talked a wee bit and we've had some fun, but I want to ask you two fun questions relative to that.
Mm-hmm.
I had heard, confirm, that one of the things that you really changed and brought to the office of synod leader are blue jeans.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to a philosophy a bit, isn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I gave you a hard time about your tie when we first started. Right?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that story. One of my predecessors, Judy Fletcher, who's former synod executive, we were a very formal office. We had an office space. There were 7 or 8 employees of the synod at the time, and people often came into the office to visit with Judy. And there is an understanding, I think, of church as a formal setting, and that spills into the corporate and institutional model of mid-council, right? I used to wear jeans to the office, and Judy would get very mad at me. She would get very mad at me. And at one point she said, "No blue jeans in the office." And so I wore black jeans because people weren't coming to see me. And I really feel like it's a level thing, right? I mean, I came into the church in West Texas, in your presbytery, in Palo Duro Presbytery. And not a lot of people wear ties on a regular basis in Abilene, Texas. It's a very, casual kind of place.
Yeah.
And I really think that the church is in a different place now than the formal, institutional, traditional model. So yeah, and like most people, I'm wearing leggings right now, so you can't see them, but
yes, we're zooming. Well, because we are talking about Palo Duro Presbytery a wee bit. I love it that one of our commissioned pastors, who never could have seen herself as a commissioned pastor, the superlative Sarah Corey, recruited you way back when to be Sunday school teacher. Give me a little story there. I think that is really special.
It was like a letter from Ed McMahon. So, I came into Westminster Presbyterian Church in Abilene in 1997, 98, somewhere around there. And my daughter would have been, I guess, probably more like around 96. Anyway, I had a young daughter. I was really new to church. I mean, I hadn't been a member of a church or even a regular attender of a church most of my life. And we came into membership in that church, and I got a letter from Sarah Corey in the mail that was like handwritten it was like winning the lottery from like Ed McMahon showing up at my doorstep kind of thing. You get to be a Sunday school teacher. And that was like, wow, I get to be a Sunday school teacher. So I did, because I didn't know it was a choice. It was a gift given to me by Sarah.
It is a gift.
It is a gift.
Some people don't see it.
And it was given to me by Sarah Corey, and I will never forget that. Never forget that.
I think we need to retell that story, especially here in Palo Duro. Well, let me ask you one more question, then you can ask some questions. I hear you have a grandchildren?
Yeah.
Tell us about. I don't think we know this about you. I want to know more.
Yeah, one grandson. That young daughter that I just spoke about in that Sunday school classroom is now a mom, and my grandson he'll be 5 in November. His initials are BMW, and so I call him Beamer.
Ah, that is lovely. Okay. I'm like that in a way. I had a child late in life, and a miracle, and we are just too much in love.
And she just graduated, right?
She just graduated, and we're trying to learn already ways to let go. She starts at Austin College in Sherman in the fall. So we're on opposite ends of the children. Yeah. But I think we're about the same on years of experience in this good old life of ours.
Yeah.
And so you're always
a piece of parental advice. When you discover how to let go, it will not be long before you have to discover how to let them back in. Okay. Right? It can be just, for me anyway, it was re-entry was difficult.
Is that like the Thanksgiving after the first year of? Yeah,
something like that.
So that first time back home is hard. I'm hearing this and I'm taking notes. Okay. One of the questions, if we go back to what we do, and I think when I'm asked what I do, I often say 3 things. We want to do everything to promote healthy churches. Right. And then the office of the presbytery often deals with 411 calls and 911 calls. When you answer that question as Synod leader, what do you do? What do you do? What's your typical day?
Oh, there is no typical day. Yeah. And I mean that sincerely. There is no typical day. And you almost have to ask that question pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, right? Because pre-pandemic, I was doing a lot of traveling for meeting and meetings of all kinds, and opportunities for listening, which are fewer. There's much. Can you hear the dog? Sorry.
That's
There are
lovely.
much fewer opportunities for listening now, but here's what I do. I listen. And I listen to what's spoken and what is unspoken from the presbytery level. And I work to support presbytery leaders and not just the individuals, but the presbyteries themselves. I assist with searches for presbytery leadership. I answer questions about stated clerk questions about judicial process and how to help people through systems, administer a grants program, a robust grants and scholarships program from the Synod, connecting people and passions is a lot of what I do. But a lot of what I do is based on listening. How do you describe, what does your day look like? Because, I mean, what does that look like to you?
Well, I would mirror that almost completely. I see my role as the pastor of the churches and pastor of the pastors. There's a few times where it's hard to be the pastor of the pastor because there might be conflict. And you try to be a non-anxious presence and listen. And also to a lot of times, especially the pandemic, I've gotten a multitude of calls on, we're meeting too soon, we're meeting too late, why are we not meeting? And so forth. And almost always I start with the question, well, what has your session decided? Or have you spoken to your session? And really reaffirm what it means to be Presbyterian, to be co-leaders with the minister as representation of the pews, and to follow that process. When we hear what it means to be Presbyterian, it's very affirming of our freedom and our responsibility. And so oftentimes it's guiding others to do the due diligence of leading that local congregation.
I love that. I love that because I've sort of seen that as, my own part of my own calling is an opportunity to flip what people see as a hierarchy of the church, where synod and presbyteries are down here and the congregations are up here, right? And because we are in support of the congregations and the pastors but that is the church, right? And so I love the way you put that.
I think one thing a minister asked me, well, what is the hardest thing that I do? And it is I'll say this for me, I fall in love with these churches. And on a bad day, I want to give them my piff. And I just fall in love with them. And I want to go, and I have learned this member or that member, and I know their hopes and dreams and foibles, and I want to reach out to them and be their pastor. But I have to say no. I have to get out of the way and let their minister be their minister, or their session be their session, and lift them up from behind. Pray for them. I will offer to be that one preacher when they have exhausted their list, perhaps. But it is a hard thing to get out of the way so that church can stand on their own and be very successful, whether that be with the minister or a PNC or the session. It is a hard thing. I have to fight really very hard not to be the supply preacher. And I have a lot of people like you tell me, don't do that. Right?
I say that out of love and support for you as a Presbyterian leader.
And by the way, I don't want to go on line on record and say, you've been very supportive of Palo Duro, and you've been very supportive of me. And there's been a few times where you were God sent and you had no idea.
I hope you've been enjoying this episode of Sunspots. Most of us, especially in these times, need to hear more about the work of the Spirit. It could be by your local pastor, youth director, or elder, your presbytery, or any ministry context. Send us that good news at sunspots@synodsun.org. And now, back to the show.
What is maybe the greatest mistake you've made that I can learn from you and the rest of us who are listening?
Oh, man.
Maybe not the greatest, but one we can learn from.
One that we can learn from. I honestly, Scott, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. Not because I don't make mistakes, but because there's so many to choose from. I think as much as I talk about failing fast and failing forward and being willing to move, sometimes I want to move too quickly and not think things through.
You're very goal oriented.
Yeah, well, as an Enneagram 3, for those who the Enneagram, as an Enneagram 3, I am very goal oriented and I'm very process oriented. And so, I think sometimes I want to act more quickly than what I should, and yet sometimes there are big audacious goals, that maybe I should have been willing to push more sooner. One of those would be like the communication services plan. That was something that I talked about it a few times, and a group at the synod finally said, "Okay, just do it. Just do it." Oh, okay. And so knowing the timing, knowing when to, take things more slowly and when to push ahead is the, again, it's not a specific item, but that's probably one of the things that I struggle the most with, especially as a goal-oriented process thinker who wants to succeed, because I am the achiever, as Enneagram 3 is known as. And that's not something I'm particularly proud of. It's just, how God made me.
I think ministers struggle with this too. Some of our churches have a very laissez-faire relationship, and they'll say, "Minister, Valerie, go and do," and then other church relationships between session and the minister. The session's very an activist, and they oversee almost every decision. You seem to bridge that very well.
Well, I would say that you speak of those types of churches. For me, a Presbyterian church should be the latter. The session is intended to be the leadership of the church. And the first church that you speak of that says, "Oh, pastor, go and do," that's a failure in my mind. This is not necessarily a popular opinion, but in my mind, that is a failure of training for ruling elders. That is ruling elders acquiescing their position in the church to the pastors. And that goes way back to the to the development of the corporate model of the church.
It's almost a trajectory, a sign of a health of a church, to see session go and be responsible and succeed by taking their role forward.
And being a partner with the pastor, and not, like I said, acquiescing their leadership responsibilities to the pastor. I have seen and heard so many stories of churches whose elders has literally acquiesced everything to the pastor. And, this is not about the pastor, and absolute power and authority tends to corrupt, right? And whether they mean to or not, it makes it difficult for the session to keep up. It makes it difficult for any predecessor for the next person who might come in.
It does.
It's frankly, it's just not.
Well, it's hard anyway, because there will be differences.
No, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The session has to be a partner in, beginning, middle, and end.
This is a tough question, maybe. Do presbyteries get along? Churches, I feel generally, I hate to say it out loud, but I think churches are really getting along relatively well. We have a great diversity in Palo Duro, but it is tough with the Synod sometimes, and it's tough with the GA. How would you answer that from your point of view as Synod leader?
So your question, do presbyteries get along with each other?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I think, yes. And I think a lot of that, from my perspective anyway, is indicative of the leadership, in at the time. So some are more,
I feel a great congenial.
Yeah, I think some presbyteries are more open to relationships outside themselves, a lot like congregations, right? Big steeple churches get a reputation or have a reputation for being isolated to themselves because they don't need the larger church. A lot of times that happens with presbyteries, where they don't need anyone else. They don't need the synod. They don't need other presbyteries. And so sometimes they can become insulated. But I feel like that's changing, because it's an understanding of, we may not need you, but we can be helpful to you. We do need each other, as colleagues, as friends, as brothers and siblings in Christ. We need one another. And so, yeah, I think that at least the presbyteries within the Synod of the Son, there is a stronger relationship between them now than I think there has been in a long time.
That's what I understand. I feel a great congeniality. I feel like I can pick up the bat phone and call any of the EPs generally, and they would not stop at returning my call as soon as they could, to offer an experience, a bit of information.
And I think those relationships,
I feel that now.
Yeah, those relationships have grown deeper, I think, through some of the last couple of years, especially the pandemic. Y'all, the EP4 meeting every week has made a big difference, because we've taken some concentrations and done some learnings together that I think have deepened those relationships. I think that's been really
well. Right now, we're dealing with flooding and ongoing PDA issues, disaster relief issues in South Louisiana, and I'm talking to people like Nanette, and my heart just goes out to. We were talking about sulfur this last week, and I'm thinking, what can we do in dry Lubbock, Texas, to help Leslie and Nanette? And so I feel a great connection to them, and they're in South Louisiana. I really think that about all of our churches in Synod of the Son, and I feel very close to them.
You got to ask me about my mistakes.
Okay.
I get to ask you, what mistake have you made that we can learn from?
Well, it's like, which one of my, let me do this more with my which one do I want to tell you about is really the question.
Uh-huh.
I have had a couple of situations where people have responded in great anger with me on Twitter when our presbytery made a mistake. And I took that very personally. And it was just, and once something starts in Twitter, it takes on a whole life that can be spewed all around the world. So I was caught into a situation in that, and that was very hurtful. And I really struggled with that hurt. And I knew that I could not have tough enough skin to withstand that one moment.
Yeah, but I will respond to that by saying that I think you handled that very well with a pastoral heart. And there's been a lot of learning from that, not just from you, but from the presbytery. Your presbytery has gone leaps and bounds, right, to some specific training, not just what it means to be a certain, position, but you've taken it. It did break something open in the presbytery, and your pastoral approach, I think, has been very, very helpful in that instance. So I don't believe that was your mistake, and I believe that you did handle it very well. So
I felt like that moment, all of us, that was our tribe, my tribe. And yet it was very difficult. I'm speaking very broadly, but there had been many people respond, and some with great anger and threats, and worse. That's behind us, and a lot of goodness has come out of it. And a lot of grace has been extended, and just a lot of love. I think also when you're in a situation like that, it's this way with an EP, it's this way, especially with chaplains, earning their respect with doctors and medical facilities. You have to earn your respect in the cauldron of fire.
Yeah.
And you're really not who you should be if you've not been in that cauldron. And that's one thing that came out of that as well.
Yeah.
There have been other cauldrons, by the way, but that's the one I'll talk about today. The pandemic has churches and individuals, all of us, the whole nation, but certainly churches, in a pressure cooker. And now that, can we take off the lid and what is normal like? And that's bringing stress and all that repressed. When do we meet? Can we bring a warm bread pudding to church and share it? At the table after the worship is over, and can we have potluck? And that sounds like such a little thing.
But
we just it is a huge thing to be able to hug someone's neck and say, "Oh, I have missed you. I love you." We're still not sure about that hug, and we've got one ear to the CDC and one ear to those people who may disagree about what to do next.
And so what does that look like from the Palo Duro Presbytery balcony? How do you feel like churches are moving forward?
Well, one, I think the churches, in a way, the silver lining in that is the session realizes their authority and their responsibility. And what has been so fun from a distance, I mean, it just tickles me at listening to how each church has responded so differently. Just a really quick example. I don't know if I want to say them by name and pick on them because I love them. But this one minister called and said, hell no, we're not going to do Facebook Live. And 2 weeks later, they were one of the first churches to do it. They're doing it with excellence. They're growing. And then some of our churches, although the giving has been down generally, some of our churches have received large donations from people they've never met around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And to embrace things like online giving, and whether it be Facebook, YouTube, Zoom for worship, I think it has helped the congregations and the sessions know this is not easy. And you are bound together in ways, maybe we can't hug one another's neck, but we can have muscle memory to be engaged online and to keep it going even as we go back into the sanctuary. Mm-hmm. To be a part of this at this moment in time, it makes me feel like, yes, God has a plan, and I'm a part of that plan at this moment in time. Mm-hmm. And I could observe that. I could be a part of that. And certainly I worship that way too, both in person right now, very much hybrid, in person, one moment by Zoom with some churches remote. Zoom has transformed Palo Duro Presbytery. Mm-hmm. And we're 41 churches in 72 counties, and it meant a lot of Holiday Inn Expresses on Saturday night. It's the loneliest thing. And I can worship now by Zoom or YouTube or Facebook Live. And if I'm able, I try to attend one and watch one each week. That is a lot of joy. I wouldn't want to say fun. It's uplifting, it's inspiring, it's joyful, and it's fun.
Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing you say is that each session has been keenly aware of their own context.
That's right.
And their session has stepped up to the plate and made decisions that are right for their congregation in their context. Even, as we were coming into the pandemic and having learned all those lessons as we come out the other side, hopefully, prayers to this guy, as we come out the other side. Context. This is you asked me the question before about why I don't like the term best practices.
Oh yeah, we need to talk about that.
Because
this is a great conversation.
Because it's contextual.
It's contextual, yeah.
And I think every congregation up until, I hope that someone is able to thread this together for congregations, because for years and years, for as long as I can remember, congregations have been looking for the checklist. How do we grow? How do we get people? How do we do, they just want the checklist. They don't want what's specific to their congregation. They want best practices. That's a checklist that they can check off. And I dislike the term best practices because it feels to me like it pulls all of the context, the richness of each congregation's individual context. And it simplifies things to a point that, that only means that those items aren't going to work, not the way that they hope that they would work in a different context. Mm-hmm. And so that's my hope for the church, is that we're able to thread, look at what you did here. Well, yeah, these are great ideas over here that these other congregations are doing. Now, how do those work in your context? Yes. And not just trying to, cut and paste and follow the 5-step plan for revitalization kind of thing. Yeah. We all have to find our own context.
I like that. We'll start saying something like, a good thing we might consider in our context.
Yeah. Something other than best practices that drives
one of the churches here was one that wanted to meet sooner than most people were comfortable. The session made the decision. Perhaps would not be this decision that I would choose. And about then, there was this joke going around that singing a hymn was coughing standing up, and we were very worried about that. And so this church decided to meet anyway, and they had one soloist sing from the narthex.
Yeah.
And that was a creative solution, but that would not have worked at half of our other churches. And even some of the churches that just began meeting maybe weeks after Easter started doing that because they had heard of this one church that started doing it 6 months before.
Mm-hmm.
But would not have worked in all context. I have a question for you, and then I'm loving this. We don't get a chance to do this enough.
I know, this is fun.
One of the things that we're asked of in ordination, and we vow, and we're trained in seminary and so forth, are the great ends of the church. And maybe we go back to that and we read it from time to time, or maybe it's espoused in installations and so forth. But one of the great ends of the church that is in our book of order is that we lean into salvation, in the story of salvation. And also then, one of the things we lean into is social justice. And some of our churches like to lean into one more than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And some of our churches may not like one or the other. And I find this is a bridge we have to continually build. As you hear me say all that, I'd love your point of view on that.
Hey, I'm not sure where to start. So the proclamation of the gospel for the salvation of humankind.
Yeah.
The proclamation of the gospel is love. Now, this is the idea. The gospel is love for the salvation of humankind. For me, I think of it as salvation from ourselves. In today's world, the proclamation of the gospel that is love is for the salvation from ourselves. And that then, if we have that love, right? If we have that love, we proclaim that love by the promotion of social righteousness. That's how those things work together for me. They are not separate. They are together. It's not, when I think of, so what you don't know about me is that when I said earlier that I came back into the church about 1996, 97, somewhere in there, that was when I came back into the Presbyterian Church. I was born again at Rhema Bible Church, slain in the Spirit, praying in tongues. That lasted about a month, because they have great recruitment, but they don't educate real well. But that is, I think, sometimes when people hear the word salvation, that's what they're thinking, and that's not the way that I read this great end anymore. I might have read it that way previously, but that's not how I read it now. It's salvation from ourselves. Good Lord, look around us. We need to love one another. We need to be saved from all of this political, divisiveness. And if we have that love that works, that means that we are going to be promoting social righteousness, promoting and working towards justice for all. That's my, how do you, so you.
I don't, would not waver too much, for me, it is, I would add one prepositional phrase, in Christ. I love that poem or that a hymn by St. Patrick, in Christ, by Christ, for Christ. That prepositional phrase is the salvation message. And if you have the salvation message, then you have to dig a little further to love thy neighbor. And that's where we then find ways for social justice. We want the best for our neighbor, but that it points to Christ in our every effort.
And how does that, I'm just going to push a little bit on what does that look like for our neighbors who are Muslim?
I think it does say to our neighbor, this is who we are, that our support, our respect, our lifting up our neighbor, whether it's our Muslim on the left or our Jewish neighbor on the right, we so want to love them and respect them that they might ask about who we are and why we are, and we can be in dialogue and respect one another.
See, I think sometimes people see the great ends of the church, specifically the gospel for the salvation of humankind. They take that as a literal, the purpose, the end game is to make everyone Christian. And I don't know that that's.
I think one of the things that's so wonderful about the Presbyterian tradition is we'll let God worry about those things. Let's lift up our neighbor and love them and represent the Christ in the best way we can. When you're a chaplain, I learned this as a chaplain, you walk into every hospital room, everyone is a different world, a different faith tradition. And you have to honor that tradition that is in that room. And the best situation you could ever have, it's the best of life, when someone will pat the mattress and say, come sit here, right here. And, and ask, would you pray with me? Or would you tell me your story? And a good chaplain will say, will you also then tell me your story? And to celebrate who they are, because yes, we all were created in the image of God and we have more in common. So that's how I find unity in the salvation message, in the social justice message. But we seem to not see one coming out of the other sometimes. And that creates conflict in our very own church and our very own tradition. The other thing I love about Presbyterian churches, wherever you go, I don't care what GA says, what Senate says, what the Presbytery says, there's going to be a clothes closet. There's going to be a food pantry. There are going to be some things that are very unique and special for that local congregation. And so in doing those things, then they're motivated to look at what other things are available that the church is involved with. Sometimes they don't agree with that. And sometimes they embrace it wholeheartedly. Again, I'm beautifully stunned by the diversity of how each church responds by their own sense of calling.
As it should be.
Yeah, I just think that's the best of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Scott, it's so good to talk to you. I've enjoyed this conversation.
I have too. We don't get a chance to talk thoughts and philosophy and scar tissue.
Just to know each other.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we don't have a lot of that opportunity, even with EP Forum, to do that. So I'm grateful for this time with you.
Okay. Me too.
In the Synod of the Son, we believe when we work together across boundaries, we make visible the good news and find wholeness as the body of Christ. In our common calling, we impact lives together. So let's remember to connect with, equip, and empower one another in the name of Jesus Christ, today and every day.